There's nothing as certain in this world as death and taxes. And there's nothing that can be more controversial than wills. You can be in the situation of leaving a will and thinking it's all terribly clear, but then you might decide to make several more wills during your lifetime, or you might add a codicil. This all adds to the complications. My particular interest is actually in Herman Kallenbach. During his life, he started by leaving everything he had to Gandhi. 5 wills later, Gandhi said to him, "No, worry about your own people." And that was quite a salutary thing to learn about all of that. But today I am talking about the Prynnsberg sandstone estate and its heritage, and the case study of ruling from the grave on the part of the Newberry family, Charles and Elizabeth. This property is located near Clocolan. It's a fine estate, and I fell in love with it more than 10 years ago. It always was a special place because it was here the Victorian lifestyle was created in a very English baronial way. It was trying to create a piece of the home counties, you can say, in the heart of Africa. It's a place of great beauty, imagination, nostalgia, romance. Same time, it's something of an architectural oddity because we don't know who the architect was. We rather think it was Charles Newberry himself. But here we have a case study of an inheritance and a family locked into and projecting forwards their own time period, locked into their lifestyle in their time, but projecting it forward and thinking that could be perpetuated forever. And we face then the practical problems in the 21st century when a family no longer wants to be bound by the ancestors' wishes. And that then is a challenge. Well, I discovered a Prynnsberg quite a few years ago, more than 10 years ago, when my husband and I and our family went to Prynnsberg, discovered the magnificent sandstone location and the cliffs. It's about 5 kilometers from Clocolan, heading in a westerly direction. When we went there, we found the Melvilles were the owners at that stage, and we had the pleasure of staying in the gamekeeper's lodge, and we had the strangest experience of going hiking into the sandstone cliffs, overhanging cliffs, and our name being Munro, it's an obvious Scottish link. And we encountered a gentleman who then said, "Are you Scottish? Can you play the bagpipes?" "No," says Keith, my husband. He said, "Well, I can." And he then proceeded to get himself, he said, "Give me 10 minutes. Came out in full Scottish regalia, right under the sandstone cliffs, a magnificent sight, and played us Scotland the Brave. I've never forgotten that moment, but my encounter with Prynnsberg kept on recurring. I found that when I was at Wits, I met a colleague, Mark Rain, who said, "Oh, you're interested in Prynnsberg?" "Yes, well, I am too. We've just done," and he worked for the architectural practice of Michael Scholes. He said, "We've just done a study of what to do about the problem of Prynnsberg," which I will come to in a moment. But he said, "We didn't actually get the job. the job to do what we recommended went to a Bloemfontein architect, Anton Root. I said, well, surely one of the things we've got to do is actually to publish your work. And I think this is an important one for architects. I'm not an architect, but I'm got engaged in heritage conservation and therefore heritage writing. And so often I have encountered architects who do very fine work and then don't get the opportunity to implement. It's the clients. There's a close relationship between the client and the architect. We went on, Mike and I then published 2 articles in the Architecture SA. In fact, I should also put in the context that I also knew about Prynnsberg even far earlier than actually going to it. In 1996, Stefan Welz held an auction sale in association with Sotheby's, and they sold off all of the possessions of Clocolan. And that's all part of my story. And this sale included some magnificent, important Egyptian artifacts, thousands of years old. And in working at the Johannesburg Heritage Resource Centre, we had an inquiry saying, what happened to these treasures from Egypt? Because they'd belonged to an archaeologist by the name of Guy Brunton, and he was married to one of the Newberry daughters, and we actually ended up tracing them to Texas, but they were part of the sale. They should never have been, should never have left Egypt. So you've got quite a few problems right there. I can add then that I always wanted to own this catalogue, and now I do. And that in itself is a story, to actually want to keep a catalogue of an auction sale. Because I then found that our close friend, Marcus Holmes, who was also an architect, it seems lots of architects that are involved in providing advice to Prynnsberg. Marcus Holmes had been involved with the, I'm going to explain this, after the sale was purchased by a London dealers, antiques dealers, the Alabasters. They commissioned Marcus to take a look. Well, unfortunately, Marcus didn't get to implement his work. And Marcus passed on 2 years ago, and Paul Kotzer and I and Heather Dodd had the unhappy but in many ways gratifying experience of saving Marcus's archive. And among his archive, we found his Prynnsberg file. And amongst them was a set of photographs from that time. So what this indicates is a layering of interest in architecture. The material that I found in Marcus's home, because having passed on, there was no one to take over his stuff. We sent it in different directions, University of Pretoria, to Wits, to Joburg Heritage. But I saved the Prynnsberg file, and I was then able to bring the Prynnsberg file of Marcus Holmes back to Prynnsberg. So that was very satisfying. Then I found myself continuing to be interested and getting to visit. We came back at the beginning of this year. It was all part of coming to Clarens and exploring the Free State. And we met the Joubert family, who are now the owners of Prynnsberg. They are large Macquarie farms. They are large vegetable farmers, and the oddest of all is that they grow valerium, which puts you to sleep. And they were then absolutely delighted to have us as our guests, to receive this file, to show us Prynnsberg. They're farmers. They kept on saying to me, we know nothing about heritage. What do we do next? and it was an incidental that in the purchase of the farms, as occurred then 2 years ago, they also acquired the property, which by this stage, 2022, had fallen into serious dereliction. Well, the story of Charles Newberry is an important one. A man born in England in 1841. He was a self-made man. He immigrated to South Africa, trained as a carpenter, very, very hard-working, went with his brother to Kimberley, became involved in transport, in building, in diamond digging, in purchasing claims. He was one of the claim holders, amalgamating claims. If you know a bit about Kimberley, you could see how this could happen. And he, over a 7-year period, became part of the central company. Following, it's a whole other story, following amalgamations, he becomes a director of De Beers, because effectively he sells out his claims to Rhodes, but in terms of his acquisitions becomes an even larger shareholder than Rhodes. He'd made his fortune by 35. 1880, he married Elizabeth Mary Daniel, who was the daughter of a Wesleyan missionary, the Reverend John Daniel. It was then that he purchases Prynnsberg and a number of other farms, several thousand acres. The farm is named for the Prynn family, who was related to his wife Sarah. And this was the basis of this great estate, the vision of this, creating this English lifestyle. The Newberrys then, by the 1880s, 1890s, began to build this extraordinary house. Their couple fathered a family of 3 daughters and 3 sons. Charles was a very early conservationist. He was into game, bringing rare game to the estate. He planted trees. He wanted to expand his holdings. He saw the estate and the farm as a working farm in a very English sense, that it would yield an income to maintain the lifestyle. He didn't want his shares in De Beers to be sold. He died in 1922. One of the pieces that I then found was the will, right, in this file, the mutual will. This was where the problem started, and this is the will of Charles and Elizabeth Newberry. And what they added then a codicil as well. Charles died 22, Elizabeth died 1935. After his death, she continued to stay on the estate. And the significance then of this will lay in the nature of the inheritance, because what Charles Newberry wanted to do was to use the English concept of one primogenitor, the idea that the eldest son should inherit, and so it should go on through the generations. The daughter should be provided for by the estate. It's not that daughters were neglected. And what do you do with something that you've created in your lifetime and you want to then pass it on? The idea was to then entail the state with a legal device that goes back to Roman times. I'm not a legal expert, so I've picked up the little knowledge I have from talking to law friends and looking at Wikipedia. I'll confess it. And it's something called fide commissum. And the idea is that you allow a usufruct to use a property, but for that property to be passed on to the next generation and the next generation. Each time it's the eldest son. So it's a challenge then for any paterfamilias to how to keep what he has created into the future. And that's essentially what I have been studying and looking at and writing about. And just to give you then a flavor of Prynnsberg, there's the cover of the auction catalogue and the kind of furniture that this was populated with. They imported from the top London shop, Schoolbreads, for example. And it was very much a house that is furnished in Art Nouveau style. And that you can still see in the fittings. By the time we went back earlier this year, the sadness was that in the interim, and remember then, whilst the Newberrys might have owned this property for 100 years, you've had about 4 owners in the last 20 years. That's not good news. It's not good news then when you then find that the place stands empty, vandals break in and begin to steal anything in brass. Finger plates, little discs around the keyhole covers, window openers, all gone missing. The Jouberts then wanted me, how can we source replacements? And it's all terribly expensive. But the place, in fact, whilst the Newberrys had this house furnished and beautifully equipped, when the sale happened in 1996, it was all gone. And it was then Rick and Sue Melville of Melvin and Moon Luggage who then purchased the property, re-equipped it. When we were there 10 years ago, it was very much equipped as a gentleman's lodge. Rick Melville created a polo field. He wanted people to come and have weddings there. What do you do with properties? Now, one of the fascinating points on this estate is the cemetery, and here are the graves of Charles and Elizabeth Newberry. So that's the reality, and there you have this house in a state, and this is what the house looks like. It's really a very quirky place. I think I took that shot from an angle, but inside you have the most magnificent, and it's still there. These are pictures that I took in January. So the glasswork has not been destroyed. There's very fine stained glass. These are the fireplace surrounds, the tiling. This is then the billiard room, which is the most beautiful room, and you reach it going up some stairs, kind of almost exiting. This is the stairs up to the billiard room or looking back down towards the house. Built of sandstone. So it's very much vernacular, but of course you could say recent vernacular. It's beautifully done. This is what I'm talking about, of saying this is the tempting brass plates. And doors then being scratched, or the roof. One of the problems for the Jouberts was that the roof was leaking, water pouring in. What did we do? So they set about, first thing was securing the roof. Now here I come back to the story of the architects and the bathrooms. One of the problems of Prynnsberg in the 19th century, you didn't worry too much. It was much more important to have reception rooms than to have bathrooms. So you didn't worry too much about ablutions attached to every bedroom. But if you wanted to create a guest house, you need a bathroom for every bedroom. So the technical problems of a house is right central. And the technical problem was getting in a bathroom into every single bedroom that you wanted to let out, and yet retaining the flavour that you're going to keep a Victorian-looking bath. But the plumbing had to work. The toilets have to flush. And that's what actually happened. There's an interior shot. This is what this Art Nouveau beautiful artwork was created. One of the daughters was Winifred, who was an artist. I mean, it was the thing for ladies to do. They gardened and they painted, and you married well. So, but you see, these are the features that we see in Prynnsberg today. There's the family, taken, a photograph taken at the time, and I was delighted to actually find amongst Marcus's collection the original, one of the original photos. That's it. So this is all being preserved. You know, it's an interesting question as to when I came to then saying, what do we do with the Prynnsberg file? There was a view that, well, put it in the University of the Free State. But I felt that it was important to continue a tradition with the people who owned the home. This was a garden taken, this is the magnificent gardens at Prynnsberg. This was taken at the time. Then, of course, there's a beautiful chapel. And not only did they have an English style, they were devout people. Although the wife was of Wesleyan family and descent, they had this Anglican chapel built in the 1890s. It's very cute and rather derelict. The bottom right-hand picture shows the destruction they're needing at St. Saviour's Chapel, and they have a project to restore the chapel. When we went in January, we found, I think it was 5 or 6 hives of bees in the chapel. And Hugo turned to me and said, don't you know a bee man who can help us? Those are the practical kinds of things when you acquire such a property. Now, I'm able to share with you that my interest in Prynnsberg has come to the attention of Jackie Kelly, and she is the lady who has written books on the heritage houses, farmhouses of Old Natal, and important houses of Maritzburg. She's worked with Hugh Bland, whose material has recently come to the Brenthurst Library, but Hugh being both an historian and a photographer, and Jackie is putting together a book. And of course it does raise the question of what do you do when you have a heritage property that ought to be preserved. The Melvilles tried, they did not succeed. It went to the next owner thereafter was a tenderpreneur from Bloemfontein, who actually wasn't also very interested. The Melvilles were interested in heritage. This gentleman from Bloemfontein wasn't. And that was where the rot started to set in. So you actually have to be very careful as to who you sell to. And it raises a question, whose responsibility? Are you just looking at your bottom line? Have you fallen on hard times? What are you going to do next? What's the future purpose of a property? And here, my last couple of slides show you something that is very interesting that we also discovered quite by chance when we stayed over in Vicksburg. And this is a house that's owned by Gavin Boy, and it's run as a guest house. What is it? It was the Newberry's townhouse. It's today called Victoria House, and it was an absolute delight to stay at Victoria House, but just for one night. And Gavin Boy has been very interested in the history of his town, man behind the Cherry Festival, and he's certainly got the right mix, and long may he continue in his enterprise. So, a fascinating story of a family and their story through the generations, a case study in legal concepts. Is it applicable to South Africa? Something that worked in Britain. You've got the core challenge of heritage. How do you repurpose, recycle, reimagine, and get a return on a heritage property? Is it just the land? So preservation with a purpose, and what comes next. Thank you very much.